In 1909, the New York Times reported that a man named Selim Habib had drowned in a shipwreck near Singapore. The report noted that Habib had previously owned the Hope Diamond and that this was simply the latest in a long series of tragedies connected to the stone. The story ran, the curse grew. Habib was not on the ship. He was alive. He had sold the diamond 3 months earlier and was nowhere near Singapore. Another man with the same name had drowned, and someone at the Times, or someone who fed information to the Times, decided the connection was close enough to print. No correction was ever issued. Not the executions, not the bankruptcies. This one detail, a verifiable lie in a major newspaper about a man who was not dead, who did not own the stone, who was not on the ship. Habib's name entered the curse list and stayed there for 100 years. I have read academic papers published in this decade that still include him. At some point, you stop calling this folklore and start asking who is writing the folklore and why and what they are selling. This diamond has passed through 13 pairs of hands across 3 centuries. The ruin of 11 of those owners is documented and real. But the story told about why that ruin happened has been shaped, edited, and distributed by people with very clear financial interests in making sure you believe one explanation and never look for another. The stone is worth 4,000 homes. The story around it is worth considerably more. Before any of this begins, the stone itself deserves a moment of plain description, because the plain description is already strange enough. 45.52 carats, deep greyish blue, the largest blue diamond ever found. Formed roughly 1 billion years ago, 100 miles beneath the surface of what is now southern India, carried upward by volcanic pressure over millions of years, and then extracted from the Kollur mine in the Golconda region sometime in the mid-17th century by people whose names were never recorded. The color comes from trace amounts of boron in the crystal structure. When you expose this stone to ultraviolet light, it does not glow blue, it glows red. A strong, vivid red phosphorescence that lingers in the dark for several seconds after the light source is removed. No other diamond of this type behaves this way. The Smithsonian's own technical documentation confirms it. The people who extracted this stone and brought it to Europe were operating in Golconda, a region with a sophisticated gemological tradition reaching back centuries. In that tradition, a deep blue stone of this scale carried a specific association. Saturn, the planet of accumulated debt and delayed consequence, the reckoning that arrives precisely when you believed you had moved far enough away from the cause. They brought it to Paris anyway, and when the consequences began arriving on schedule, a different explanation was always ready. Jean-Baptiste Tavernier published 6 volumes documenting his travels through India and Persia. He was meticulous. He recorded prices, weights, locations, the names of intermediaries, the condition of roads between cities, the particular quality of light in certain markets at certain times of year. He was the kind of traveler who wrote down everything. In 1668, he sold the large blue diamond to King Louis XIV, along with 14 other stones, for 220,000 livres. Louis granted him a title of nobility in recognition of the transaction. Tavernier's published accounts make no mention of where or how he acquired the blue diamond specifically. A man who documented his travels in that degree of detail across 6 published volumes simply does not say where this particular stone came from. Not a vague entry, not a partial reference, nothing. One object among everything he catalogued, and the one page that would have settled the question of its origin is blank. The story that filled that blank arrived in documents written after Tavernier's death by authors who had no access to his records. A Hindu temple, a carved idol, a theft that brought divine punishment upon everyone who touched the stone afterward. Once that story was in circulation, nobody was looking at the missing page anymore. Tavernier died in Moscow in 1689 at approximately 84 years old. He died in a bed at a considerable age, having spent his life traveling the trade routes of 3 continents. His name is on the curse list anyway, because the story required a first victim, and he was the most convenient candidate available. Louis XIV received a 112-carat triangular stone and had it recut in 1673 to 67 carats by his court jeweler, Sieur Pitou. The triangular, crudely cut Indian stone became a French gem. It was renamed the Blue Diamond of the Crown, later the French Blue. The king wore it on a ribbon around his neck at ceremonial occasions. When you reduce a 112-carat stone to 67 carats, 45 carats of material disappears. In a stone of this value, at this moment in history, that disappearance is not incidental. The original shape is gone. The weight is different. The name is different. The most traceable physical characteristics of the stone as it left India no longer exist. What remains is French. What remains belongs to the most powerful man in Europe. And what remains carries a new story that begins not in Golconda, but in a Paris workshop in 1673. Louis XIV died in 1715 at 76. After 72 years on the throne, the longest reign of any major European monarch, he died in his bed at Versailles, surrounded by his court. His name is on the curse list anyway. The stone passed to Louis XV, who died in 1774, his treasury damaged by costly wars. Then to Louis XVI. The French Revolution began in 1789. Louis XVI was executed in January 1793. Marie Antoinette 4 months later. France was in revolution. The monarchy had been collapsing under the weight of financial ruin and social fracture for 20 years before either of them died. The royal treasury was being looted. Every object in the government warehouses was at risk. The diamond sat among thousands of other seized items, one stone in a room full of causes. Selecting it as the explanation requires setting every other cause aside simultaneously, and deciding that a blue stone in a warehouse explains what 20 years of bankruptcy and starvation could not. In September 1792, during the looting of the royal treasury, the French blue disappeared. It was gone for 20 years. In 1812, exactly as the French statute of limitations on stolen property expired, a deep blue diamond appeared in London in the possession of a merchant named Daniel Eliasson. A gemologist named John Francilian documented it. The weight matched the recut French blue. The color matched. Scientific analysis conducted in 2008 confirmed beyond reasonable doubt that Eliasson's stone and the French blue were the same gem, recut once more to its current weight of 45 carats. Eliasson committed suicide shortly after the stone became public knowledge, under accusations of knowingly possessing stolen French crown property. 20 years is the precise duration required by French law before a theft claim expires. The stone surfaces the moment it becomes legally untouchable, not a year earlier, not a year later. The moment the legal window closes, the diamond appears in London in the hands of a merchant who then dies before he can be fully questioned about where it came from. Whoever held this stone through the French Revolution, the Napoleonic Wars, and 2 decades of European upheaval, waited for a specific legal date, and then produced the stone in a city outside French jurisdiction. That required patience. It required legal knowledge. It required access to information about French property law that does not belong to a casual opportunist. The stone was subsequently acquired by King George IV of Britain, possibly through informal channels. At George IV's death in 1830, his personal debts were substantial enough to require the liquidation of much of his estate. The stone was sold again, quietly, through private channels. No record of the transaction survives. The first documented reference to the stone's next owner appears in 1839 in the gem collection catalogue of Henry Philip Hope, a London banker. The catalogue lists the stone, gives it his name, and provides a description and an estimated value. The catalogue does not say where he bought it. It does not say from whom. It does not say how much he paid. Henry Philip Hope died in 1839, the same year the catalogue was published. His 3 nephews spent the next 10 years in litigation over the inheritance. The oldest eventually received the diamond. What followed is this. The Hope family displayed the stone publicly, twice, in 57 years. The Great Exhibition in London in 1851, the Paris Exposition in 1855. After those 2 appearances, it returned to a vault and stayed there for decades. Each year, it remained invisible. The mythology surrounding it deepened. Rumors accumulated in the absence of the object itself. By the time the stone reappeared on the market, it had spent half a century becoming more valuable by being unreachable. The family that owned it never had to answer a direct question about how it came into their possession. The vault made the question seem beside the point. The stone bears their name permanently. They gave it nothing except those 2 public appearances and 57 years of careful silence. By 1909, the stone had passed through several more hands. Simon Frankel, an American jeweler, bought it from the Hope family and suffered significant financial losses. The Turkish collector Selim Habib acquired it, was falsely reported dead in a Singapore shipwreck, and had in fact sold the stone 3 months before the newspaper story ran. It eventually reached Pierre Cartier. Cartier had a problem. The diamond's provenance was complicated. Its recent ownership history involved litigation, bankruptcy, and a fabricated death that had never been corrected in print. Buyers with legal counsel would ask questions he could not comfortably answer. In 1910, Cartier showed the stone to Evelyn Walsh McLean at his Paris salon. She did not like the setting. She said no. Cartier took the stone back, had it reset in a new mounting of white diamonds, brought it to the United States, and left it with her for a weekend. By Monday, she had become attached to it. The new mounting served a quiet purpose. It removed the stone visually from its previous ownership. In the white diamond setting, the Hope diamond looked like something that had never belonged to anyone else. Something that began with her. The weekend served a different purpose. McLean did not buy the stone after examining it at leisure and concluding it was worth the price. She bought it because by Monday morning, she had already begun living as the person who owned it. She had worn it through the house. She had looked at it across dinner. She had begun to understand what it would mean to return it. And by the time Cartier came to collect an answer, the answer was not about the stone anymore. It was about whether she could go back to being the person she had been on Friday. She could not. The price was $180,000, roughly $6 million in today's terms. For that, she received a stone, a setting, and a 300-year-old story that would consume her for the next 36 years. Evelyn Walsh McLean was not a naive woman. Her father was an Irish immigrant who found gold in Colorado and built one of the largest private fortunes in America from nothing. She grew up watching a man construct wealth from intelligence and discipline in a place where neither was guaranteed to be enough. She wrote a memoir. She ran a social network in Washington that connected presidents, generals, and senators across multiple administrations. She was not peripheral to power. She was central to it. And at some point after her son died, and before her daughter died, and before her husband lost his mind in a private institution, she wrote the following sentence in that memoir: "I know better, and yet, knowing better, I believe." That sentence is not confusion. It is a person describing with complete precision the trap they are in and the reason they cannot leave it. Washington did not know Evelyn Walsh McLean separately from the woman who wore the Hope diamond to state dinners, who let wounded soldiers throw it across hospital wards during the war, who put it on her Great Dane's collar, who had it blessed by a priest during a thunderstorm and kept wearing it regardless. To sell the stone was to dissolve the public version of herself. She would have remained wealthy. She would have remained connected. But she would no longer have been the woman who owned the dangerous diamond and was not afraid of it. That specific version of herself she could not give up. Her 9-year-old son Vincent was hit by an automobile in 1919, 8 years after the purchase. Her husband, Ned, descended into alcoholism, political scandal, infidelity, and a mental institution, where he died in 1941. Her daughter Evie was found dead of a sleeping pill overdose at age 24 in 1946. The fortune eroded through the Depression and through decades of spending that the original Walsh gold could not sustain indefinitely. When McLean died in April 1947 at 60 years old, the diamond was found in a shoebox under her bed, along with $4 million worth of other jewels, all in cardboard boxes, not in a vault, not displayed. Under the bed of a woman who had spent 36 years performing invulnerability in a house she could barely afford to maintain. I have thought about that shoebox a great deal, not as a symbol, as a fact. The most famous diamond in the world, in a cardboard box, in a bedroom, in a house that was already too expensive for its owner to keep. After everything the stone had cost her, in the end she did not even display it. She kept it the way you keep something you cannot look at but cannot bring yourself to put away. Harry Winston bought McLean's entire jewelry collection from her estate in 1949. For 9 years, he toured the Hope Diamond across the United States and Canada in a traveling exhibition. 7 million people paid to see it. In November 1958, he donated it to the Smithsonian Institution. He did not arrange a ceremony for the transfer. He did not commission armored transport. He placed the diamond in a box, wrapped it in brown paper, and mailed it from his New York office via registered post. The total cost was $145.29. Postage accounted for $2.44 of that. The remainder covered insurance of $1 million. The package was marked fragile. The donation generated a tax deduction for Winston's business that exceeded what a private sale would have recovered at the stone's declared value at the time. Beyond that calculation, the transfer permanently attached the name Harry Winston to the National Museum of the United States. Every catalog entry, every exhibit label, every documentary produced in the 66 years since contains the phrase "donated by Harry Winston." His name appears in the room where the most visited museum object in the world sits behind glass. 7 million visitors per year, indefinitely, without any further expenditure on his part. The postal carrier who delivered the package, a man named James Todd, suffered a crushed leg in one automobile accident, a head wound in another, watched his wife die of a heart attack, lost his dog, and had part of his house destroyed by fire, all within 12 months of completing the delivery. When a Washington Post reporter asked Todd whether he attributed any of this to the diamond, he said, "I don't believe any of that stuff." Referring specifically to the house fire, he added, "Perhaps I'm actually having good luck." Winston had spent 9 years watching millions of people file past a cursed diamond. He understood precisely what the stone was worth, and precisely why it was worth that. He chose to transfer it in the most ordinary, unremarkable way available to him. $2.44 in postage. And in doing so, he communicated something no owner before him had understood clearly enough to act on. The story was the asset. The stone was what the story was attached to. And once you have extracted everything the story can generate, the most efficient move is to place it somewhere it will be maintained for free, indefinitely, by an institution with a federal budget and 7 million annual visitors who will keep the mythology alive without any further investment required. The Smithsonian has owned the Hope Diamond since November 1958. 66 years of institutional ownership with no misfortune attributable to the stone, no financial collapse, no executions, no family members dead in accidents. The institution is solvent, well-funded, and the Hope Diamond remains its most visited exhibit. Jeffrey Post, the Smithsonian's curator of gems and minerals, has stated on the record, "The curse is a fascinating part of the story of the Hope Diamond that has helped to make the diamond as famous as it is. But as a scientist, as a curator, I don't believe in curses." The institution he works for uses the curse narrative in every piece of public communication about the stone, because the curse narrative is why 7 million people per year stand in front of a pane of glass in Washington. The Smithsonian did what no private owner managed to do. It separated the stone from the story. It holds the story at a distance, uses it to generate revenue, employs a scientist to say publicly that it is false, and places it on every exhibit panel regardless, because the story and the science serve different audiences and both audiences walk through the door. 11 private owners across 3 centuries merged their own identity into the story and were eventually consumed by what the story demanded of them. The Smithsonian hired a curator who disbelieves it publicly and charges admission to see it anyway. 7 million visitors per year. The most visited museum object in the world. Operated by people who will tell you plainly, if you ask, that the whole thing is not real. I have spent a significant part of my working life in rooms where objects like this one change hands, provenances with gaps, histories assembled from partial records and convenient interpretations, Prices that only make sense if you include the story in the valuation. What stays with me about the Hope Diamond, having spent a long time with the actual documentation, is the consistency of it. The missing page in Tavernier's journals. The 20-year disappearance timed to the day a legal threshold expired. The newspaper death that was never corrected. The weekend loan that turned a refusal into a purchase. Each intervention arrived at exactly the moment a cleaner explanation was needed. Each one precise enough that calling it coincidence requires a particular effort of will. The stone itself did nothing. It sat in boxes and vaults and bank drawers and shoeboxes. It was recut 4 times to remove evidence of its previous identity. It glowed red in the dark, while its owners called it blue. 13 people held it across 3 centuries. 11 of them ended badly. Some were ruined by revolution, some by their own financial recklessness, some by the slow cost of performing invulnerability in public for decades, some by grief, which is not a curse, it is just grief, and it finds everyone eventually regardless of what they own. The 12th mailed it away in a brown paper package and collected the benefit on the way out. The 13th put it behind glass and hired a scientist to call it harmless. I find myself returning most often to Evelyn McLean, not because she is the most dramatic figure in this story, because she is the most honest one. She looked at everything surrounding the diamond, understood how it worked, wrote it down clearly in her own words, and kept wearing it regardless. Because the alternative was becoming, again, the person she had been before the stone arrived, and that person, she had decided, was finished. The diamond is still there, still rotating on its pedestal, still glowing red when the lights go down. The shoebox is gone. The woman who kept it is gone. The house she could barely afford to maintain is gone. The stone remains, patient, as stones tend to be, waiting for the next person who needs what it has always offered. Not luck, not power, not protection from anything, just the particular feeling of being the one who owns it.